Good evening, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen, and really excited today to be launching the virtual launch of Jack Carr's brand new book, The Devil's Hand. Here he is. Yeah. And we just got him in today. We got our signed copies, which have this terrifically cool little book plate right here that Jack has signed. And I'll be putting the link in the comments field if you like to order your very own signed copy. And for those of you watching on Facebook, I will be monitoring the comments. So go ahead and send in your questions for Jack. And I'll pop up towards the end of the program. And we might have a special little guest appear here as well. And Barbara's tuning in from her home office here. And so I will go ahead and hand it over to you, Barbara.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Mr. Carr, to you.
Barbara, thank you so much for having me. I wish we were doing this in person, but hopefully next year.
Well, I hope we will. We are so fortunate here at the Poison Pen. We did Jack's first ever book event for the Terminal List, and we have been very lucky that we have then done book 2 and book 3, and now today we get to do book 4. So I feel like a mom raising him from a pup. And actually, seriously, I am old enough to say that I raised Jack from a, no, I really am. So it's really our Twitter person at the Poison Pen said to me today, she said, "This is great." She said, "We're heavy on Jack today. You've raised him from a pup."
That's awesome. That's so great. I love it.
Anyway, cheers to you.
Oh, cheers, everybody.
And I'd like to give a shout out to your wonderful publicist, David Brown.
He is the best.
Love that guy. In our relationship, and who got you a wonderful appearance today on Fox 10 here in Phoenix. And I will put tomorrow or whenever I write the next e-news, I will put that link in. But Jack makes a wonderful speech about the Devil's Hand and inspiration for it, which we can now recreate. But I did think that it was fabulous. I'm going to brag just for a minute, because I would like you to see that my copy from Jack actually has a letter inscribed in it. I'm not putting up with bookmarks. I get the real deal. It's so much fun.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for all your support. It means so much to me, and I love coming out, whether it's my book or anybody's book, to come out and do sit down and talk with them and ask questions. And I just enjoy talking about books and reading so much. And I love being in independent bookstores because my mom was a librarian, so we spent a lot of times as kids in independent bookstores and in libraries. So I feel very comfortable surrounded by books and by people who love reading. So it's fun to share that experience with everybody and get to talk to everyone. And next year in person.
It will be, but I should also add that Jack has been here for selected other events. He got to hang out with Clive Cussler one night. We did a fabulous event with Stephen Hunter, and was it Mark? Was Mark part of that?
Mark was with us there too, and Kyle Mills, we did another one, and then another one with just me and Mark. So I love coming down there.
I know, it's just so much fun. And actually, Jack will be joining us with luck, and we'll talk about why it might be difficult. Stephen Hunter has gone off reservation and has written a wonderful book called Basil's War. And on Friday, I think it's May 7th, Jack and I are going to be talking to Stephen. And it is not what you would think of as a Stephen Hunter book. It's a World War II book, and it's it's not a swagger. It's
exactly. It's not Bob Lee swagger. It's not Earl swagger. It's he loves writing those other things as well. I mean, Bob Lee swagger has obviously been very good to him, and that family's been very good to him, obviously. But he loves writing these other things too. So he's so passionate about that. And I have my galley copy sitting on my desk ready for me as soon as I finish this book tour. So super excited to get into that and be able to talk to him in May when we're out there.
I brought it up. I brought it up because Stephen Hunter is one of Jack's heroes, one of Jack's literary inspirations. Oftentimes, you watching these things want to know, who inspired the author to write and who the author reads. So we can tell you for sure, one of them is Hunter. So Jack, James Reese, let's go all the way back to the Terminal List, because really the dynamic that you started in that story, the reason it's called the Terminal List, is still with us, and it's still really important in The Devil's Hand. So why did you give him this particular set of events and emotional makeup that has propelled him forward?
Well, I knew for that first one that I needed to come out with something that was very primal, very visceral, very hard hitting, something that would differentiate the novel from the thousands of others that they see at Simon & Schuster in particular, because I knew I wanted Emily Bessler to be my editor, to be my publisher. After looking in the acknowledgement section of Vince Flynn and Kyle Mills and Brad Thor, this name kept popping up, Emily Bessler person. So I knew I wanted her. So I knew it had to stand out when it crossed her desk. So I wrote down 5, 6, 7 different ideas. The Terminalist was one. I really wanted to start with Savage Son, the third book, but I knew that the characters weren't yet developed, weren't yet to a place where I could explore that theme of hunter and hunted in the dark side of man that I explored in Savage Son. So it was very evident to me that the Terminalist was the one to start with. And I was coming off a deployment to Iraq. I was picking my head up, looking around, seeing that my family needed me. I'd made the decision to get out of the military. And at that point, it was 16 years at war. And so you're looking at those 16 years and you're wondering, you're looking at Afghanistan, you're looking at Iraq, and you're saying, I wonder, did my friends, what did they actually die for over there? It's just, you can't not ask that question, especially as a leader moving out of the tactical realm towards the operational, and if you stayed in towards that strategic type of decision-making position. So it was very natural for me to explore some of that in the pages of The Terminalist. So you can read that book as just an escape. You pull it off the shelf and it's this revenge thriller. That was the theme, revenge without constraint. Or you can take it a step deeper and it's about someone who becomes the terrorist or becomes the insurgent that at that point he'd been fighting for 16 years. And you can go a little deeper and it's really about someone who brings the wars from Iraq and Afghanistan home to the front doors of people who have been sending young men and women to their deaths for at that time 16 years, and here we are now at 20. So that was really what propelled that storyline, and continues to pop up in the other novels as well, particularly now in The Devil's Hand through another character who happens to be the President of the United States.
So what happened to James Reese? What tragedy befell him that made him take on this mission?
Right, so I was inspired on that piece of it from the church hearings in the 70s. For those that remember, Frank Church of Idaho held a series of hearings that exposed a lot of overreach by different agencies of the federal government. And out of those hearings, there were a lot of changes that were made, particularly in our intelligence circles and the intelligence community. And one of those was the testing of drugs on people without their consent. And some of those people were college students, people in mental institutions, prisoners, and people in the military. So in my first novel, I needed a protagonist who really had nothing left to lose. In order for him to turn into that terrorist, to turn into that insurgent, he really needed to have nothing, meaning he needed to think he was dying. And like the ancient code of the samurai, he needed to go into battle thinking he was already dead. So I thought, what if this medical experiment that they stopped doing in the 70s, what if that popped back up somehow here a little bit later? Someone didn't get the memo. Enough time has passed since the 70s for them to test some drugs on our nation's most elite soldiers with some side effects that they need to cover up. So his troop is wiped out in the mountains of Afghanistan. His family is wiped out on the home front. And he finds out that he is dying from this brain tumor, which frees him up to do the things that he does in that book.
So in order to go forward, obviously some things need to change. So in True Believer, which is the sequel to, you all know this, you're watching this, so you live for this moment, you know more about Jack's books than I do. But True Believer, the second book, what course of action is James? I don't want to give anything away in case there is anybody watching this who hasn't actually read Terminal Man, True Believer, and Savage Son. But obviously your character has to evolve as he's moving forward. So you've given him that situation in the Terminal Man. What situation is he in True Believer?
Right, so if people see that there's more than one novel, so for the first one, you can kind of play around with it, meaning you don't know if he's going to make it to the end or not. You think he's actually going to die, but when someone sees, there's a second and a third and now a fourth book, it kind of gives up the surprise. But he needs to transition. He has to find out that he's actually going to live. So he needs to find out how to live again. He needs to find that next mission in life, that next passion in life. And I think that everyone can connect with that because we all go through transitions, whether it's changing a job or death of a loved one or divorce or whatever it might be. We're all going to go through these transition periods in life. And for me, I saw a lot of people leaving the SEAL teams that had a hard time leaving that life behind. They just stayed, they didn't move past it. And I recognized how important it was to build from that foundation. And I was very fortunate in that I knew I wanted to serve my country in uniform first, and then I wanted to write thrillers, kind of like I was reading growing up. So I knew that. So I was very, very fortunate, but I also identified that it was important to make a physical and psychological break with the military because it has such a hold on you, particularly in special operations. When you're going down range, you have your best friends and your teammates to your right and your left. You're focused on this mission. You're not worried about the leaky roof at home, calling the plumb, whatever. You're not worried about any of that. You're solely focused on the task at hand, and the consequences of making a mistake are quite dire, not just for you, but for your best friends. So recreating that in the private sector is probably not going to happen. So you need to realize that and move forward. So I use that for James Reese. He's now going on this journey, and I took a risk with that one in that I talked about that journey going across the Atlantic. And rather than just starting anew after the traumatic events of the Terminal List, I thought it would be disingenuous to the reader to just all of a sudden have him pop up and continue going on with this new adventure. He needed to get there. He needed to go on this journey. So that was really a story and a journey of redemption in that second novel, which allowed me then to move into Savage Son, which is the one I wanted to write since the 6th grade when I read Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell, 1924 short story. So I always wanted, even back then in 6th grade, I knew that one day I'd write a thriller that paid tribute to that short story, and Savage Son was the one. And then this one, I got to take a breath. So this one, I got to take a breath and explore something I thought about a lot when I was in the military, and then what I continue to think about today as a citizen and an author, which is what has the enemy learned by watching us on the field of battle for the last 20 years of war. So we've essentially been playing poker, and they've been circling the table, looking at our cards, seeing how we play those cards, and then applying those lessons to future battle plans. So I thought, what if I am China? What if I'm Iran? What if I'm Russia? What if I'm North Korea? What if I'm a super empowered individual or a terrorist organization? What have I learned by watching us over this 20 years? And what have I applied to future battle plans? So that formed the basis. And I did the outline for this on the way to Russia. So in August of 2019, I'm headed to Russia, to Kamchatka Peninsula, to do some research for Savage Son. I got back from that trip in late August, and on the trip, I left my computer behind and my phone behind because who knows what people have sent me over the years in email, and I didn't want Russian intelligence sucking out these emails or whatever else is on my computer as I walk through customs or to confiscate them and suck all the information out. So I brought my notebook and I brought a sat phone to call home, and I got to outline the whole book back in 2019 to and from Russia. So I start doing that research into infectious diseases and the weaponization of infectious diseases, which is what helps propel the plot forward in The Devil's Hand. And then COVID hits. So I'm deep into this research, and I'm hypersensitive to when COVID hits. And I think, well, I've been in the enemy's shoes here for a few months. What are they learning from our response to COVID? And so I start incorporating that into the story. And then a summer of civil unrest happens, and the enemy's learning something from this as well. So that gets incorporated. Then we hit a very contentious political season, an election cycle. So that gets incorporated because the enemy is learning from all these things. They're not just passively watching these events. They are taking lessons and applying those to future battle plans. So it was a very dynamic writing experience, especially with the kids under the roof, because they left school in March for COVID, so the school shut down. So I had the kids helping as I wrote this one. So that provided a little bit of an extra challenge.
Sure it did. But one thing I always think about when I watch the amazing amount of work that you do, the fabulous books that you write, your astonishing social media presence and all, is that life in the military, being at first an activist and then, operational and so forth, you are so mission oriented, you are so organized, you are so insanely active. I mean, I have a high energy level, but you wear me out, so I mean, really. But I think, it's amazing. Your life in the military prepared you for writing these kinds of books, not just with inspiration and not just with plot ideas and situations and all the rest of it, but you have a particular mindset, a discipline. And physically, you're clearly a really strong guy. I remember, when we did the Terminal List, I remember saying to my staff, "Be careful, guys, because this is someone who could just kill you with his finger."
Now I'm retired.
With Jack, I said, he could just kill us off. But you've got tremendous stamina because you do so much. And I'm wondering if COVID, the fact that you couldn't be like ranging around the world and the whole bit, maybe that was good for you, kind of a pause and a reset, even though you were scrambling kids at home and all the rest of it. You've been on the move your whole adult life.
Yeah, that is very true, and I think I was a little stronger and a little better shape during that for our first meeting for the terminal list because I've been doing a lot more typing these days than I've been doing working out. So these days I do get out on the mountain with the kids and all that sort of thing, but I definitely need to get back in the workout mode here shortly. But yeah, no, it's interesting in that I think my wife would appreciate it if I took a break at some point. Like this is I haven't figured out how to do that part yet. So I need to get better at finding that balance or know when it's time to take a break. Because up until this point, it's just been a full-on sprint, and then I haven't stopped. Because on the battlefield, what you're doing is you're aggressively solving problems, and you're looking for to capitalize on momentum. You're looking for gaps in the enemy's defenses. You're adapting to them as they adapt to you. And then I do that on the written page as well. As I'm writing these things, I'm aggressively problem solving. But if I mess it up, consequences aren't nearly as dire. I can come back and edit it the next day. But at the same time, everything else that supports the writing effort is I focus on that as well, and I study it and figure, hey, what could authors not do in 1965, in 1975, 1985, 1995 that we can do today, like this that we're doing right now? How can I thank readers for taking a risk on me as a new author, and then telling a friend about it, whether that's one friend or on social media, it's 10 friends or 10 million, and everything in between. So I try to use those platforms as a way to say thank you to everyone, because I couldn't do what I love to do, which is the writing, without that. And I also we can have conversations like this and long form conversations that aren't just a one sentence response to a question or something along those lines. So there's all sorts of things that we can do today to build the readership and engage with readers that we couldn't have done back then. So I look at that's the adapting part. Just like adapting on the battlefield or adapting to a problem on the page. Well, same thing on the business side of it that all supports the writing effort, adapting to that as well, to this changing environment. So it's just, and I don't think it was the military that prepared me. I think it was my mom. So I think it was just growing up and knowing that, hey, we didn't take many breaks. Like when we're moving, we were out and about doing things.
Really high energy. But I mean, I'm always awed by your stamina. Yeah, and every once in a while I look at your Twitter feed or something, then I have to go lie down. So, I'm deeply impressed. So I want to ask you, tell me a bit about what you call asymmetrical warfare.
Right. So what that really means definitionally is that, by definition, is that you have a strong country. It could be, or let's take it down. You can take it down to a unit, a base, anything. So something that's strong on this side and something that's weaker on this side, either by numbers or by what kind of weaponry you have or something like that. So it's an asymmetric. It's not equal. It's not USSR versus the United States. It's asymmetric. So it's us in Afghanistan, where we have all these multi-million-dollar bombers, and we have satellites, and we have all this weaponry. We have aircraft carriers parked all over the world, and then we have some people living in villages. And what are they using? They're using a Kalashnikov rifle, the same ones that they've been using since 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Maybe a few RPGs, maybe a couple mortars, maybe some bombs that they make, some IEDs that they make themselves. That's what they have. So that's an asymmetric threat, and we haven't really figured out how to counter that very well. And it's an interesting dilemma, because if you crush them, you look like the bully, and if you don't, then why aren't you? What's wrong with you? Why can't you figure out how to defeat this foe doesn't have that superior technology or numbers that you might have? So that's the asymmetric threat right there, which is the position we're in with most countries, other than probably China right now. But so that's asymmetric warfare. It's David versus Goliath.
Right. Well, I'm a child of the Cold War, when it was Russia, the United States, and there weren't a lot of other players involved. They were all going to be much lower level. And so you're right that when we're dealing with Iraq and whatever, it's a completely different thing. So in this book, we have, is it going to be a spoiler to talk about the president? Because this happens right.
I don't think it happens very early on. Yeah, I don't think so.
Right. So we still have Reese, who is still, his wife and his child were killed. And so he's still pursuing that. I mean, revenge is still part of his life. But now we have a president who, well, because you opened the book with that very poignant scene of 9/11. And of course, this is the 20th anniversary year of 9/11. I was actually in Washington at the first National Book Festival, and we flew out of Washington on 9/11. So we were there. And I remember walking across the back of the Capitol. I took some people to the Folger Shakespeare production of, I'm trying to remember what it was, The Merry Wives of Windsor, I think it was. Anyway, it was fun. It was clowns and roller skates, and they were doing some, really updated Shakespeare. And a whole bunch of us authors. And we walked across the back of the Capitol on our way back to the hotel, and Washington was absolutely beautiful. It was peaceful. It was a gorgeous night. Things were in bloom. The weather was perfect. It was like when the skin temperature and the outside temperature were about the same, so you felt like you were almost walking through warm water. It was so fabulous. And we all talked about it. And that was the last time that Washington was like that. I mean, it all went up the next day. Wow. And it's never come back. I mean, Washington now, look, we have fences around the Capitol. We have, barriers at the White House. I mean, and I still think how interesting it was to have been basically not quite at ground zero, luckily for me, but to have been there on that moment. And, I think most of us can remember who were alive exactly where we were and what we were doing when the news came of the Twin Towers, and then everybody was mesmerized by the continuing television coverage. So you choose to start your book where that is happening in New York. So tell us about that.
I do. So I had a conversation with a guy in Argentina back in 2017, and he asked me some questions about 9/11, and that really started me thinking about this particular plot. And I was percolating, as at the time the Terminal List was finished. I already had True Believer essentially finished because I started that one before I'd even submitted the first book to Simon & Schuster. So this one's been percolating since the exact plot, not necessarily the, hey, what has the enemy learned part. I've thought about that for a long time. But this particular plot, as far as 9/11 goes, and what happened to maybe it's the support network that possibly enabled those hijackers on that day. It's very rare where you don't have a support network giving you tacit, illicit support for something, material support for a mission. So I thought about that, and then I thought, well, what if we had someone who loses the love of their life in that attack and makes it their life work? How would that person then go about getting revenge? And so I created this character, this new president, who people think is there for quote unquote the right reasons. He's a new JFK. He's bringing us together, but he's really there because his fiance was killed on 9/11, and he wants access to every single bit of information he can possibly get to find out if there was a network that might still be active, either in this country or abroad. He wants to open those files and see what's in there, and then he wants to bring those people to justice. So that's where James Reese comes in.
Well, you do make a point of the fact that there's no official sanction for assassination by the government. In the front of the book, you have some quotes and so forth pointing that out. But then we have Reese. So we have a president who is bent on revenge, and we have Reese who's already traveled that journey some. And so we have the two of them. Now, in this particular scenario, it's interesting that you looked at weaponizing biowarfare at a time.
Yeah. I mean, and that was in August of 2019. I started researching that.
Who knew? But the one you've chosen is what, the Marburg variation of Ebola?
Yep. So it's Marburg. It's what it's called. So it's separate from Ebola, but it's a hemorrhagic fever, or hemorrhagic virus rather. But it's a true story of how it came about. Marburg existed, but a Soviet scientist injected his thumb with this virus, and he was immediately sealed off. And then he took notes as this virus slowly liquefied him and drove him insane at the same time because his brain's getting liquefied at the same time. So for 3 weeks, he takes notes on what's happening in there as he's bleeding through his nose, his ears, his mouth, his pores, like where you would sweat, blood coming out of there as he slowly liquefies and goes insane. And then the scientist, of course, he's sealed back in that time in a stainless steel coffin and buried. But before he's buried, they take a sample out, and sometimes when a virus invades a host, it becomes more virulent. So in this case, it becomes variant U for his last name, Dr. Ustinov. So it becomes variant U. It's one of the most deadly viruses ever created, really, because it was weaponized. And then with the fall of the Soviet Union, we have those scientists going to places like Iran, going to places like China, going to places like North Korea. And so that was my study into that. And then I also studied this history of bioweapons in general, particularly from the end of World War II up to today. I studied the Japanese program in World War II, who they used their bioweapons program against. Same thing with the Germans. And then what happened with that data, with that research at the end of the war? Well, that informed the bioweapons programs of the Soviet Union and the United States. And then in the 1970s, we become signatories of a bioweapons convention. And I thought, well, what does that mean? And how can we still continue to make these bioweapons? And I found out because you're allowed to make biodefense weapons. And in order to make a biodefense weapon, you also need the actual weapon. So it gives you a sneaky way to continue to develop weapons programs so that in the bioweapon space, so that you can then figure out how to defend against it. So no one really ever stopped. In fact, the Soviet Union and probably the United States ramped up after we signed a bioweapons convention. So that was largely in my study anyway, largely theater that we want to then have other countries adhere to, but not necessarily us.
You know, I've often thought, I remember when Joseph Cannon wrote a brilliant book called Los Alamos, in which we get to the point where the scientists have built the bomb. And despite debate about the pros and cons, you know that they're not going to be able to resist at least a test. It's human curiosity that drives that. You just cannot leave it. And so you have to ask yourself, why did they take a sample? Why not just bury the guy in his stainless steel coffin and be done with it? And so, letting things loose in the world. But then, Jack, there's been a lot of discussion over the last while with climate change as the ground is thawing, the permafrost is, thawing, glaciers are melting and thawing, the Amazon's being cut, whatever. That stuff is being released or can be being released that has not been present in the world for a long time. And there's some example story about, I think it was villagers who dug up a reindeer or something in Siberia or dug up something in Siberia. And all of a sudden they let loose, I'm trying to remember, I think it was smallpox or something anyway, that had been safely buried and frozen. And because of the thaw. So, aside from human curiosity, it may be that we are going to be looking at more threats because of climate change and the fact that things are maybe going to be freed to rampage among us that haven't been around for a long time.
That is interesting. That is very interesting. Well, as part of my research, you have to read between the lines in a lot of these things when you're trying to research these bioweapons programs and things that might have classifications. And in the military, I had no involvement at all with any of that sort of thing, so I didn't know much about it other than what I read in the Hot Zone, in Richard Preston's Hot Zone back in the 90s, and I hadn't read it since then. So I hadn't done that much study. But in reading between the lines and then reading and talking to different people that all leave some parts out, well, once you talk to 5, 6, 7 different people and you do your own research, you can start filling in some of those gaps, which is fascinating. And looking at how the Soviets tested some of their bioweapons, possibly even down in Africa, because down there are not infrequent outbreaks of hemorrhagic viruses. So that was fascinating to research some of that part and then try to piece this puzzle together when different journals or books or people that you interview are all giving you a little bit, just a piece of that puzzle, and you have to kind of weave it together in how I think a journalist would.
Well, I do think the plot that you have built, we don't want to do any spoilers here, but the fact that that we have this killer variant loose allows various players to decide how to weaponize it. And then we have a question of, how to deliver it, because that's a real problem when you have something that can kill everybody is, is the guy that's going to be the delivery agent or the mechanism. Is it a suicide mission, or does he even know it's going to happen?
Yeah.
And then, if you've managed to infect a huge population, how does the rest of the world deal with it? We can see from the WHO and the study they've done in Wuhan that there are no good answers at the moment, because nobody really wants to talk about all the possibilities. So, it's a very tense book and very frightening to read this, because, you don't know, and terrible choices for the president too. At some point, he's going to have to make some decisions. It reminds me a bit of Churchill and Coventry. What do you sacrifice for the larger good? I looked up the front of the book and the quote, and I love the way you say this: buried within the 9,723 word text of Executive Order 12333, United States intelligence activities, is this sentence in Part 2, Paragraph 13. Prohibition on assassination. No person employed by or acting on behalf of the United States government shall engage in or conspire to engage in assassination. So we already know that James Reese and, in fact, the president are extra legal. They are going to be acting outside the scope of their office. They're going to be facing up to this really terrifying threat. And we're going to have players that we might not think of, or players that are not as major as, let's say, China and Russia. So this is a really terrifying book.
Well, thank you. And I didn't want to have the exact, like kind of some things that I'd read before. I knew I wanted it to be different. So it's not just, hey, a bioweapon comes in, infects someone, he comes in, or anything like that. There's that twist to it, which we won't exactly talk about here.
Oh.
But even back in 2019, when I put the whole outline together going to and from Russia, I knew I didn't want to have to be like, oh, here comes his bioweapon book, like that sort of a thing. There had to be a little more to it, which there is. And on the assassination part, I've always been fascinated with that as well, because you go on these capture kill missions, you go on these kill capture missions, what's the gray area? And so there's the one chapter in there where I really have the president asking questions of his advisors about, what does this mean? What does this paragraph really mean? What did we do after 9/11? Who do we base our policy concerning targeted assassination on? What the Israelis call eliminations. And really, it's been part of the state of Israel from its inception. It's been in that government, military, intelligence apparatus as they built their nation, and it's a very strong part of it even today. Not so much for us, although we do obviously do that from time to time. Not necessarily other world leaders, although there are some very interesting attempts back in the 60s that people may have read about with Castro and a few other players there. There's some great books on that era in CIA history. But we based some of our post 9/11, according to my research anyway, for some of our post 9/11 policies on what the Israelis did. And I talk about it. There's some dialogue in there between the president and his advisors on what these different entities of the federal government do when they're looking at a list of targets and figuring out how to take people off the board in a way that's legal.
Yes, well, for anybody who watched West Wing back when it was, flourishing, one of the big plot threads in that was that the president did agree to the assassination of a foreign national, and that really echoed throughout the series, came back to bite him. And I what you're basically talking about is, extremely difficult ethical and moral choices and the relativity of many of them. If you try to do it in an absolute sense, it's difficult. So you've got constantly shifting things going on. So we do have a special guest who is about to join us. And one of the reasons we have a special guest is because the special guest and Jack.
Hey,
it's Mark Greaney. Come to join us. Good evening.
Hey, Mark, what's up, buddy? How are you?
Hey, Jack. I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Oh, awesome. Great to see you. Thanks for doing this.
For sure. Congratulations. I'm excited for you. Tomorrow's the big day.
I know. Thank you so much. And I wish we were doing it in person again, because then we could go out afterward and have a nice dinner and some drinks. But
I know we did February of last year, and then things shut down shortly thereafter, right before your tour last year, right?
crazy. Yeah, you were like the last author to get out on tour, actually, in real life, in person, and then everything started shutting down. That was crazy. Actually, I remember walking down to the plane, actually, to go when we went to Florida, to the Savannah, to the book festival out in Florida. Walking down, a friend called who's a doctor, and he's like, "Are you on the plane? Don't get on, turn around." But I'm like stepping on, like at that point, because everything was so uncertain. Then I was like, I'm all in. Let's go. Let's do this. Mark needs me. Mark needs me. I can't let him go alone. My swim buddy needs me.
There you go.
So, let's hope for next year you'll be happy to know that our favorite bistro has survived COVID. So
that's good.
So we're ready. So one of the reasons that, aside from the joy of seeing Mark and Jack, always a huge pleasure, that we thought it would be fun to have them on together was that they both have all this wonderful news about film adaptations of their books, The Gray Man and James Reese. So guys, tell us all about it. Who wants to go first? Mark, you want to go first since you just
Sure. Yeah. So they're making a Netflix is making a film version of The Gray Man, which is actually shooting right now and is shooting through July, I think. I know they're in LA right now, but they go over to Europe, to the Czech Republic, to do some more shooting there. And I just read the script, the actual shooting script, maybe a week ago or a couple weeks ago, and was really happy with it. I'm very excited. It's and Jack, you feel the same way, that you and I both read 100 novels that we would love to see films of, and so you realize how fortunate you are that this is happening, and there's other people that deserve it every bit as much as we do, but we also have to totally latch onto it when it happens and enjoy the moment. So that's where I am now. And so tell us about this series, The Terminalist.
Yeah, actually, so I met one of the stuntmen from the Gray Man series when I was in LA last week, and as I was leaving town, I stopped by Terran Tactical to run that course. I'd never been there before, and what's crazy is it's right by the Reagan Library, and I was kind of like, wow, this is really close. Like the Reagan Library is like a backstop to that place.
It's funny. That kind of makes sense. I like it.
It does kind of make sense. So I was there and I met this guy. He was so fantastic. I don't know who he's doubling or anything like that, but he's working on the Gray Man, and he was so nice. Okay. He was so cool. Awesome. And awesome. I was like, I want to get a picture with him, but I'm like, I need to work out a little more before we take a picture together. No, we did. We got one. But man, these guys are amazing. Like the guys that do the stunt work are incredible.
Yeah, for sure.
On the set for Terminalist, not last week, but the week before, and it was crazy. It's like 350 people on set in LA, and I was there for 5 days. I had to get there 2 days early for COVID protocols, and if you flew, I think it was like 4 days you had to isolate, but I drove, so 2 days, and then I was tested 4 times over that 5 day period while I was there for COVID, and so they're obviously very strict about it and want to make sure that nobody, doing everything they can to mitigate. But it was cool. It was so exciting to see everybody there on set. It was so fun. Chris Pratt starring, Antoine Fuqua directing. So the two of them are just such incredible people. And Antoine is so nice, like one of the most incredible people I've ever met. Chris is amazing. And from the top, like their attitudes just kind of filter down, I think, to the rest of the cast. There's so many people came up, and people from like craft services or the person, do an assistant to here or there. And they'd come up and say, hey, my son's is going to Marine boot camp. Would you, sign this or whatever else? And they said, and this set has something that's so different about it than any other movie set that I've worked on. And so many people said this to me. And a lot of it, Antoine and Chris, but then we had like 15 SEALs, 10 to 15, somewhere in there. Let's say 12 guys that I worked with in the SEAL teams, either playing SEALs or doing stunt work, or one guy's an actual actor in it who's been taking these acting classes, and he's just crushing it. I was so impressed. So we had like a reunion on set as well. So it was like a reunion. Then you have Antoine, you have Chris. So
you knew some of these guys from back in the teams?
Yeah, I knew like most of
awesome.
them. Out of all the SEALs there, I think I was only 2 that I didn't personally know, and we had a great time catching up and then seeing those guys work. And I wanted to get in there with them because the way they're flowing, doing their thing, it's just like we would in real life. I felt like we could take everybody to include some of that cast and go and run and go take down a house if we need to. So it was really
well. If you're in LA, there's probably a house that needs to be taken down. You guys probably can volunteer for that.
Yeah, we probably didn't need to go far from the Paramount lot there, but no, it was awesome. It was really cool experience, and for me, I'm just thrilled.
So I'm curious. So how did they shoot a series? Are they shooting the episodes consecutively, or they have this one crazy big storyboard where they shoot everything just as efficiently as possible? Or, you know?
Yeah. So no, it's episode by episode, and each one has a different director. So I'm gonna try to get out
Oh
there
wow.
to LA for each one to say thank you to each one. Antoine is like, overall executive producing and all that stuff, so he can kind of guide and do things,
Yeah.
especially when it gets to edits. But yeah, it was incredible. But yeah, they're doing it sequentially. There's a couple little things that are out of place that don't make sense because they're flashback or they're kind of out of order or something. But for the
Yeah.
most part, it's all sequential the way they have it planned out. So it's it's been crazy to be part of the process. From
Yeah.
help with that first script, and then to be advisor on all the other scripts, and realizing very early on that like the book First Blood, very different from the movie First Blood, but both
Yeah.
fantastic. I love them both.
Yeah.
So from
Yeah.
very early on, I kind of resigned myself to, hey, this is going to be different, and that's okay. Like you're trusting when you take something that you make it, it's like you're trusting somebody with it, and it's like, okay,
Right.
I'm trusting you
Right.
with it, and kind of we'll see what happens. So
I feel like you and I've had this discussion before, but the thing that I always stress to readers that are like, they need to make it exactly like your book is like, these people are artists as well and creative people as well. And they're not just engineers whose job it is to take your page and then visualize it. They're putting their own spin on it and take on it. And, when I read the Gray Man script, I had read the original script written by Joe Russo years ago, and I knew that was the script they were using as the basis. So there was never like a super doubt in my mind, but I hadn't read, the actual shooting script, and other people had come in and done passes at it. So when I finally read it, there were things I was going like, there were things where I was going like, oh, this is different, but this is cool. And then there were things like, damn, I wish I thought of that. Or, I mean, I was telling my wife as I read the script, I was like, this makes me want to up my game in the dialogue department. Some of this dialogue is so good. And it's so, they got the character as I envisioned him so well. And it was like, the book that I'm working on now, which is book 11 in the series, I'm like, all my dialogue just became a lot more important to me. It's like I kind of owe it to, that book will be coming out about the same time as the film. And I really want to make sure that, the book reads as well as the film plays, because it's pretty neat.
Oh, I'm sure, man. I'm sure it will. But yeah, same thing. I noticed some things like, obviously, hey, this is a lot different. But for Chris and Antoine, they wanted it to maintain the spirit of the novel. So explain that darkness, that grittiness, that violence,
Yeah.
that hard hitting primal nature. So they wanted to keep that part of it. But the rest of it, when you're telling that story visually, you're right. Yeah, these people they're creative in their own right. They work in a different medium. And for me,
Yeah.
growing up reading novels and then looking at how they were adapted to television or film or whatever it might
Yeah.
be, I was aware that, hey, that's how it's going to go. And
Yeah.
I don't want them to just transcribe it. Like I could have done that with a little bit of time probably.
Yeah.
They're taking it and then they're making it into something where they're telling this story in a visual medium. And in this
Yeah,
case, over a series.
exactly. And I have another thing that Sony has optioned, and the producer for that asked me if I was interested in writing the screenplay. And I remember when he said that, I remember thinking like, I wouldn't screw it up, but there's people that could do it better. It's just like, that's not my, wheelhouse. I write 150,000 word books. 120 page screenplay is a very different animal for me. And I might have had more hubris if I hadn't tried to write a screenplay once before, which ended up being, turned into something that I'm proud of, but it's not a screenplay anymore. And it's a whole different medium, and I have a lot of respect, as you read the screenplay, and I'm sure as you've read the screenplay for Terminalist, you see things and you're like, wow, they covered that so efficiently and minimalistically, with a look or a phrase or something like that, where I probably would have, devoted a chapter or a paragraph to the same thing, because it's a different animal. And so I basically said, thanks for giving me the option to write the screenplay, but why don't you get a good screenwriter? I think that would make it better. I'd rather, the final result is the best product that it could be.
So guys, just for clarification, because it's not 100% clear, with the Gray Man, how many episodes are there going to be? And is it going to be just the Gray Man, the first book?
It is. So it's just it's a film adaptation. So it's a Netflix film. So like a 2-hour movie. So it's not a series. But when I read the screenplay, I saw stuff from book 1, book 2, book 4, book 5, and book 6, all in the first one. Not that they took the plot lines of those things, but characters that don't come in later in the series come in earlier in the series, because they do want to make a franchise out of it and have more in the future. So they're establishing relationships and stuff like that. So it's funny to read the screenplay going like, okay, that happened in book 2, that happened in book 6. Oh, this guy came in book 5, you know. So it was interesting to read it from that perspective.
Okay, so it's a film, a movie. It's not long form television.
Correct.
All right. And Jack, what is Amazon doing with the Terminal List?
So it's an 8-part series. So like
this is going to be long form television then, right?
Yeah.
And is it just the Terminal List? I mean, did they start at the beginning and roughly go to the end of the Terminal List?
Yep, exactly. And so they're talking about book 2 and how to do that. And so at least they're having those conversations right now, but I would guess that it all depends on how this turns out. Like if it's a disaster, they probably don't do the next one. But if it if it makes sense to do the next one, then they probably do, depending on Antoine's schedule and Chris's schedule and all of that. But right now they're talking about it like they're wanting to do it. So they're putting things in here that will allow them, like Mark said, they're putting some characters here so that if it goes on to that next one, that they laid this foundation here in this first series, so it makes sense to move into the second one. So it's a fascinating process to be part of that and see it. I was kind of a sponge, and I'm thrilled regardless. I'm just happy to be here. But it's so just to see that, but I learned a lot about screenwriting and how it's done, and everybody was so nice to me, and really kind of like mentored me along this as they asked for input, and they were asking for input. They're also teaching me at the same time, and I was very receptive to that because I was just fascinated by the whole process, and they were very good on the gear. They want to get the gear right. They want to make sure that it's authentic and real and all that sort of thing. So that's been fun, introducing them to friends of mine that have these different companies, or build this knife over here, or this car over here, whatever it is, and seeing.
Did you meet the armorer? Is there an armorer for the thing? I guarantee that's like the first place you shot to. When you bypassed Chris Pratt to go meet the armorer for the.
Exactly. He was right there when I got there. We'd been talking on email and text and going back and forth on these different things, because there's certain things you can get in Hollywood, and there's some very interesting ATF type rules out there. Like you can't, if you're an armorer and I'm an armorer, I can't for one project, I can't go borrow something from you or release it from you for my prop house or whatever. There's these ATF things. So if you have a fully automatic machine gun, even though it's fake, it's blanks or whatever, I can't get that from you for some strange reason. So some things are a little different just because they couldn't get them, or some companies hard to deal with, and they're not going to spend X amount of dollars to buy them or whatever it might be. So, but it's pretty cool. They got pretty close on most everything, to include a very cool rifle that's very, very unique.
So are they using like the 416s, or is it like MP7s or MP5s, or like what?
So I think we ended up with M4s, and I forget exactly, but we have there's only a certain number of machine guns we could have. PKM, but it's like the only one for the prop house type thing. So it's like it's very interesting. And then each one you need like 3 or 4. I didn't realize that. So you need like the one that's what we call a shape in the military. They call it just plastic. So it doesn't do anything. It's just a piece of plastic, but it looks like the actual real thing. And then the one that fires blanks, and one that fires a paintball or something. And then so they have 4 different weapons and 4 different blades for every different weapon that each actor has. So it's crazy. There's a lot going on there, and it's like a military operation, because at the end of the day, you're turning your nods, you turn in your blade, you turn in your gun, you turn in all these different things, just like we would in the military, coming back from a mission to make sure we had accountability of all these different things. So it really did look like a military operation, because you have craft service, so you have the logistics chain, you have the food, you had just like in the military, all that stuff. You have the director, your commanding officer that's doing his thing. You have your lead actor who's like the troop commander, rallying everybody and leading them forward. It was a lot of parallels to
when you think about it as an author, you can put your characters on the moon, or you can move an aircraft carrier over here or whatever, and then when that has to be realized or manifested in the real world, then that costs money, and decisions have to be made, and like logistically those things have to happen. So this other project that I have, that they're making an audio play for it. I mean, they had to hire 13 Mexican actors, and they did it remotely out of Mexico City, and they had a Lebanese woman and all this other stuff. And it's like, as I was writing it, I didn't think about the logistics of coming up with all these characters and finding actors that do it and stuff like that. So afterwards, you're kind of like, oh, sorry, maybe I went a little big scale, but it was just not even on my radar. It's the same thing with film, I guess.
Yeah, I wonder how do they audition for that if it's audio, how you do someone does a read just like you would now virtually, probably it's like the actors.
Yeah. They sent me clips of people and said, what do you think of this guy or whatever, and it kind of gives you chills to hear people acting out the stuff that you are basically. I'm just sitting there with a Starbucks coffee and a muffin, typing on my laptop, and then suddenly there's somebody in Mexico, saying the lines or whatever. It's fascinating.
That's amazing. That is so cool. Yeah, and someone has work because you wrote that. That's wild. That's amazing.
That's amazing. Giving voice to somebody you made up and making them real. That's a really interesting experience. So speaking of, tell us who the cast is for those who don't know. Mark, who is the cast of The Gray Man?
So the hero of the series is named Court Gentry, and he's being played by Ryan Gosling. Although in the series, his call sign is Sierra 6, and in this film, basically he's just called 6 the entire time in the film. But his name's Court Gentry, and he's played by Ryan Gosling. And the villain is a guy named Lloyd Hansen, and he's played by Chris Evans. And there's a character named Danny Miranda, who's played by Anna de Armas. And Billy Bob Thornton is playing Donald Fitzroy, who is like sort of Court's mentor type guy. And Alfred Woodard is playing this woman named Margaret Cahill, who's like a head person in the CIA. And I can't pronounce his name. The guy from Bridgerton, I feel terrible now. Reggae Gene Page, I think is his name, but that's my Tennessee version of it. He's playing a character named Carmichael, who's very integral to the series as well.
You're going to have all the women in the world watching it. He really is something.
We'll take it. Yeah.
That is an incredibly heavyweight cast. Did you have anything to do with that?
No, I didn't have anything. Yeah, I knocked on Ryan Gosling's door and got down on my knees and begged him to do it. No, I had nothing to do with it. I mean, I only in the sense that 5 years ago, I teamed up with the Russo brothers to option this with Sony, and then Sony ended up doing a deal with Netflix. So the Russo brothers was my choice, and I think that was a pretty easy choice for me to make back then. And I did meet with them and talk to them about the characters and that sort of stuff. But the cast was all them, I guess.
Wow, it truly is an amazing cast. You are so lucky. Jack, tell us who is going to be in the terminal list.
Yeah, so Chris Pratt stars as my protagonist, Navy SEAL sniper James Reese, and he's the only person I ever thought of playing the role as I was writing it, which is the crazy part, because he'd only played Andy Dwyer on Parks and Rec at that time and had a very small role in Zero Dark 30 as a SEAL. But he was which is always a strange choice for back then, but I just knew. And so he optioned it out of the gate in January of 2018 before it even hit shelves. And then I pictured Antoine Fuqua directing, who did Training Day and Tears of the Sun, Magnificent Seven, Equalizer. I imagined him directing it as I was writing, and sure enough, now he's there in that seat. So it's amazing.
Wow. It's like fairy dust sifted over the two of you. That's
crazy. So amazing. Crazy. But we have a great Taylor Kitsch, who of course when he got cast, I had every female that I know ended up texting me and asking if they could meet him. So he's fantastic. What a great guy. Oh my gosh. Just texted me right away. Jean Triplehorn, who was in The Firm and Basic Instinct and Waterworld. She's incredible. And she texted me right away too. So normal. All these people, I didn't know what to expect, but all these people are so normal. She's like, hey, just want to do a good job, and just like you would, any normal person would. So it's been fantastic to be able to talk to everybody. Riley Keough is in there. She's incredible. So it's Constance Wu is in there, and she's gonna knock it out of the park. So you have all these amazing people, and the person they have playing Liz Riley they haven't announced who she is yet, but she is fantastic. We had a phone call 2 nights ago, and just talking about the character and all that, and the amount of research that they do in the backstory to get this is right. It's I didn't know what to expect, I guess, but they put a lot of work in. It's incredible to see all this come together. That's for sure.
Do either of you have a projected release date, or is it way too early to ask?
I'm hearing spring or summer of next year, so it's a full year out easily. They're going to be filming in Prague in the middle of July, so it's going to be a little while.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah,
Jack, do you
mine
have
is 2022 sometime, and I'm sure it could always move based on a variety
Very
of
good.
factors between now and then. So, but sometime in 22, I suspect. I hope earlier. I hope it's April, whatever the second Tuesday in April is. Would be
when your book
fantastic.
comes out.
Yeah, that would be
Yeah,
ideal. If I could guide them that way, I certainly will.
yeah, that's too perfect though. Yeah.
Well, it will certainly be life-changing for both of you in many respects to have these come out. And, it will bring so many more people to your stories. Because no matter how many books sell, it's never quite as many as eyeballs that are on screen. So
Interesting.
it's
Yeah, no, I'm
Yeah.
super excited. And what's really cool about it is, so I'm so excited because Mark has been so amazing to me as I started down this path, and dear friend and all that. And so what I love is that people, I think, are going to see that and like want more. Like they're going to get to the end of that show and be like, oh, where do I go? And they're like, oh, there's this Netflix, or there's this Amazon thing called The Terminalist. I'll go over there. And then I think people will get to the end of The Terminalist and be like, oh, I want more of this. Oh, there's this thing on Netflix, this Gray Man over there. So I think it all is like self-supporting, which is a thrill for me because Mark has been so supportive. I love the Gray Man series as well. And I talk, people are like, hey, what should I read next? I love your stuff. I always point them towards Mark. So to have that relationship, and then also to have what I see as like series and movie coming out at the same time that also kind of self-supports one another is just beyond cool.
Yeah, and it's also the same thing with the books, right? I mean, it's like if somebody reads The Devil's Hand tomorrow or this week, they're not going to sit there and wait an entire year to to buy your next book. They'll buy it in a year, but they'll go out and pick up a Daniel Silva or me or Josh Hood or any one of all the guys that are doing this. So it's always a benefit to everybody, and I guess it benefits Barbara as well if people go out.
it's the rising tide lifting all boats, to use the
Exactly.
I'm going to call Patrick up because he probably has questions to bring to you. I wanted to remind everybody that Jack's autographed copies of The Devil's Hand arrived at the store, but I also want to say that we still have some autographed copies of Relentless, the 10th Gray Man. So if you missed it, you still have an opportunity to get one with Father's Day coming up and all of that,
That's right. There we go. And before Patrick asks his question, so Mark, I think you're rubbing off on me a little bit because this one is a thick one.
Oh, really?
And I didn't realize it at the time. I thought it was like about the same length as, I thought it was about the same length as True Believer, which up until this point was the longest. And I did an author's note for the first time. Usually I do a preface to kind of set the tone, but this time I did an author's note at the end to talk about what was fact, what was fiction, of what people had just read, kind of talking about that if they had questions about that sort of thing, which I think added a little bit. But yeah, this is definitely getting close to a Gray Man type right here.
You're starting to get fatter.
Gray Man territory.
Yeah.
You can use it as a weapon or a doorstop at the same time.
Yeah.
Whoa, look at that guy. Where's his beard?
Oh, look, there they are, side by side, Patrick.
Yeah, it's about the same, right?
Hey, there you go. Mark's a little longer still.
Well, let's see. We've got some good questions. Carrie asks, as each of your books contains a main theme, can you share what theme book 5 will follow?
So I can't. Yeah, so I have. I'm in the middle of book 5 right now. First book, Terminalist, was really a story of revenge without constraint. That second one is a journey of redemption. Third one, Dark Side of Man, to the dynamic of hunter and hunted. This one takes the enemy's position and is really about studying what and applying lessons from the battlefield of the last 20 years to a future attack. And this fifth one gets personal again. So I'm very excited about this fifth one. I don't want to give too much away, but I have a title. It is outlined. I'm in the middle of it, and that's why my brain is right now. So it's strange. Like authors told me this would happen, but you're like talking about this book that you finished up months ago, and your head's all on these other these problem sets of your next novel. And you're like thinking back on some of these things, but so I think I'll go out and I'll say that that fifth one gets back to more that primal, perhaps sniper on sniper, very personal type of a storyline.
Right. Let's see. Bev asks, the topographical backdrop throughout Reese's many exploits is vivid and magnificent. What made you choose these locations?
Ooh, That is a good question. First one, I'd been to Iraq and Afghanistan. Obviously, those play in. I was living in San Diego, finishing up my time in the SEAL teams. I'd been to all the different places that I write about in that first novel. For that second one, so he's heading off across the Atlantic. He's got to go somewhere. There's only a few places he can go. Maybe he can get into the Med. Maybe he just hits the side of Africa, get off there, or maybe he goes down south. So I was kind of there were only a few choices there for True Believer as where he could go. And then I thought, okay, Mozambique is pretty wild, and for someone looking to go off the grid, that might be a good option. So I went to Mozambique, put boots on the ground. It was absolutely perfect for what I was doing. The time to sail over there, I talked to two sailors. Luckily, I'm good friends with Jimmy Spithill, who's an America's Cup sailor, and he put me in touch also with someone who does these big trans world races, Volvo Cup things, which are amazing. So I got to say, like, hey, if the guy has this skill level, how long would it take to do this, along with some mistakes, and then get down here and around here off the coast of Mozambique? So I got to work all those out with people that really knew what they're doing. And then for the next one, for Savage Son, I was inspired through a book called The Most Dangerous Game, short story we talked about from 1924 by Richard Connell. And in that one, I wanted to kind of pay tribute to that short story. So I needed an island. I had this Russian thing going from True Believer. So Kamchatka Peninsula, Russia ended up being the case, and I flew over there and spent some time on the ground just so I could weave that local flavor into the novel. So for me, it's fun. I know Mark travels around a lot of different places too, doing this research. And luckily for this fourth one, for The Devil's Hand, COVID, I mean, I didn't need to travel because we were locked down for COVID. So luckily this takes place mostly in the continental United States in places that I had already been. So I didn't need to go anywhere. So this fifth one, I need the world to open back up because there are two places that I need to go to put boots on the ground. So I'm hoping by the end of summer that some of these places have opened back up. And even though the book will be written by then, I can still go and then come back and weave in some of that local flavor that I can only get by going there.
Mark, how have you coped? Because, in the years that we have been doing this together, you have traveled some amazing places and pretty constantly.
Yeah, last year was the first year I hadn't, well, that's not true. I had to have some ankle surgery like in 2016. So I did a book called Gunmetal Gray from my couch. But I had been to, there's some of the locations I'd been to before. And the same thing happened for Relentless, which is my new book. Because last year, because of COVID, I couldn't go to Berlin where most of the book takes place. This year, a lot of my book takes place in India. And right now they're not giving tourist visas. I've tried the business visa and have been turned down for that. So I'm gonna hope that tourist visas get opened back up sometime pretty soon. And if not, I'm writing the book anyway. I'm watching movies and I'm reading books, and I'm writing the book anyway. But I would love to get to Mumbai at some point, even as Jack said, even if it's late in the summer, even if I've finished it, the book, and I'm working on something else, the editing will be going on until October, and I'll be able to weave in things. So my hope, we're in the same boat on that one, Jack.
I know, fingers crossed. So we'll see.
Next year, I'm doing my book in Hot Springs, Arkansas. I don't care what anybody says about anything. I'm just going to make that happen because that's like 2 hours from my house.
Perfect. Day trip.
Stephen Hunter did that, didn't he?
That's right. Hot Springs.
Yeah. Well, here's a really interesting question. Laura asks, how would Mr. Carr describe himself in high school? He mentioned a book he read in 6th grade. His mom was a librarian, which I think is so cool because they always have the right answer. Did he feel destined for the military, or did it fit as a career because of his exploration of books in his youth? A writer first or military first?
Well, I think it would be military first, just because you have to do that chronologically. But I knew, and I think I knew that was the first calling, just because my grandfather was killed in World War II. So I grew up with pictures of his squadron. He flew a plane called the Corsair, which is the one that had the gull wings that would fold up on the carriers. He was killed in May of 1945 off of Okinawa. But I grew up with the silk maps they gave aviators back then. I just knew that that's where I was going. And that's before I was really reading the types of books that I would come to love when I hit about age 10. So about age 10, that's when Hunt for Red October came out. I was in the 5th grade. And that's what my parents were reading, and that's what they were talking about. So that's really was my transition from kind of young adult type stuff into exactly what my parents were reading. So that's when I then discovered David Morrell and Nelson DeMille and A.J. Quinnell and J.C. Pollock and Mark Olden and all these guys that I just emulated, just looked up to back then, and then knew that, hey, after the military, I'm going to write books like these because I love them so much. So I've always been a reader, but I think earlier in life, so at age 7, I knew I wanted to be in the military, and it was like 10, but probably 6th grade, so probably 11 when I was like, okay, after the military, then I'm going to write.
What were you like in high school? She asked that question.
So I was.
What crowd did you hang out with?
I don't think I had like crowds necessarily, but I read a lot because back then, you had your Atari 2600, so you can only spend so much time on that. You could ride your bike to the video store and get a VHS tape, and or hope they had one, look in the return bin, see if somebody was kind and rewound it, and then you could turn on TV, or you could wait for your show to come on. You could wait for like the Fall Guy at 8 or 9, whenever that came on. So those are your options. You could get outside, so you didn't have all these other distractions back then. So point being, I read a lot. I read a lot of nonfiction because I knew where I was going. So I was studying terrorism, insurgencies, counterinsurgencies, warfare, reading everything I could on that front. And then I was reading all those authors that I just mentioned. And so it was a lot of reading, that's for sure, all in preparation. And I didn't realize that reading all those authors that I loved, and some of whom I'm friends with today, and it's just such an honor for me. I didn't realize that they were really giving me that early education in the art of storytelling. Back then I was reading it for that magic. I just loved it. I loved the stories. And also I knew that, hey, these guys probably did some research into these characters, and a lot of their protagonists were either SEALs in Vietnam or special forces guys in Vietnam, or they were a CIA person in Vietnam, something like that. That's typically in the 80s and 90s. A lot of protagonists had that background. So I was like, what did, they did some research into this, and that's gonna give me a little knowledge as I move along my path towards the military.
Mark, what were you like in high school? Why have I never asked you this question?
I was really, I had a ton of social anxiety, so I was really shy. I was a big reader as well. I read all nonfiction. I didn't really read fiction until I was about 19, when I picked up Patriot Games, which was the first Clancy book that I read in 87 or whatever. I was 19, 20. Before that, I read a ton. My father was in the Second World War. He was infantry, mortar, 60 millimeter mortar, and he saw combat in Germany, and then was actually in the harbor in Manila when the war ended. He had just arrived, so he almost got to fight on both fronts. So I read a ton of military history and stuff like that, because I was always fascinated about that. My dad ran the local NBC affiliate here in Memphis, so I grew up around the news and him talking about the news, and he had all these interests that I, just locked onto just through osmosis, not because I wanted to emulate my dad or anything like that. It was just sort of like, he was interested in these things, I got interested in them, and that's sort of who I was. I was a shy kid. I did play drums in a rock band, so I had long hair, but I was probably the shyest rock drummer that ever walked the face of the earth. And I pretty much had social anxiety till I was in my early 40s, and I was a published author.
So no groupies for you when you were
no. I would point them to the guitar player. I'd be like, Paul's right over there. Then I know where you're going.
Gotcha. All right, Patrick, anything else?
Yeah. Did you ever see Spinal Tap? This is Spinal Tap. No.
A million times.
The drummer was always, getting killed,
spontaneously combusting.
Mysterious circumstances.
Yeah.
Okay, Bev, this is another one for Jack. Bev asks, will you have a cameo appearance in the Terminalist movie, and what can you share about it?
I think yes, maybe, kind of. We'll see. So I'm going to leave it at that. It's a strong possibility, but then also you never know if these things end up on the cutting room floor. Stephen Hunter actually had a cameo in Shooter, where he plays a gun store owner, somebody behind the counter in a gun store, and that scene totally got cut, so it didn't make the film. So that's always a possibility. So we shall see.
Ooh. Do you know the only author I can remember that I had 100% cameos was Colin Dexter? Every single Morse, Colin Dexter would appear magically in Oxford doing something. It was always, you just knew to watch for it, because he was going to pop up somewhere. And he was kind of an undistinguished little guy. It wasn't like, he was going to hit the screen and everybody would go, or whatever. But it was like Hitchcock, I guess, So funny. Mark, are you going to be in The Gray Man at all?
No. I mean, honestly, I'm writing book 11 right now, and as soon as I'm done with that, I have something else that's due really by August, and then I'm going to start working on Red Metal 2 after that. So I feel like I have 3 books. I don't necessarily have to finish all 3. I have to finish 2.5 of them by the end of the year. But yeah, the movie is something I see on Twitter when people talk about it, and that's about it.
Gotcha.
Wow. 3 in 1 year. That is insane. That's awesome.
I know. What was I thinking?
That's great. That's great.
I have an interesting scenario put forth by Laura. She says, another question for Mr. Carr. Okay, so we're all finally at the Poison Pen for a book signing. There are 40 or so live people are in the bookstore. All the lights go out. She says, I mean, all the lights go out. Down the street, no lights. Cell phones don't work. I'm assuming with cell phones that even though there is no cell or internet reception, the camera and flashlight would work. What is our next step? And yes, it is an EMP. I'm not sure what that means. No cars in the area work. What's next?
Electromagnetic pulse right there. So we know your camera's not going to work. Nothing's going to work at that point. So you got to have a contingency plan. So you got to find a car that is probably mid 70s, maybe late 70s, not even early 80s, but you have to have one that that'll still fire up. Has to be combustible engines. You got to track down a classic of some sort. And luckily, we're in Scottsdale and we know where to go, right, Barbara? We know where to find those in the museum. Hopefully they're still there, and we can get in one of those. And then we probably head north. I've got a little network, or you could go south. So I've got a network south and north of Phoenix, but we're probably gonna want to get out of that city pretty quick in one of those cars that still works before everything.
You just need a carbureted engine.
Yeah, and you can have some other things in there as well. So I happen to know a couple in that museum will work, Barbara. So we'll be okay.
Yeah, Jack and I have actually surveyed the number of cars available to us, and we could stage a break-in. Right.
That's right. We've got a plan.
A secret operation. I've always wanted to do one. I love it.
Right. Yeah. We might get to do it yet. We'll see.
We might.
Let's see here. There's I just want to bring up this guy, Joshua, who's watching. He doesn't really have many questions, but he has some great comments. He just says, Jack Carr is a true icon of the military thriller, a total patriot, and truly the greatest writer of his generation. Thank you for our service to our great country. Total respect to this American legend. That's a nice comment.
Very nice, Josh.
And then he says, again, Mr. Carr, thank you for your iconic epic novels and for your service to our country. What made you decide to start writing after leading special operations teams? And was your writing influenced by these years?
Yes, and so yes, it was definitely influenced by those years, but it was something I wanted to do since that 5th, 6th grade period. I just knew that I would do that after the military. So also around 1988, so when I was in high school, I think I was probably a freshman maybe, my mom introduced me to Joseph Campbell through a series of interviews he did with Bill Moyers called The Power of Myth on PBS, and I went out immediately and got Hero with a Thousand Faces, and I still have my original copy. I've added to it with another edition, but I think after reading that, I applied that to everything that I've read or that I watched as I was going on my own reading journey. And then in the military, of course, after I got, or as I was getting out, so like the last year and a half is really when I started writing, and I thought I was just going to sit down and start typing away, and I thought it was just going to be a story, but it was evident not from the one-page executive summary I wrote, not from the outline, but when I actually sat down to turn that outline into the book, where I realized right away that, hey, this is going to be a much more personal writing experience than I initially thought. And I took a lot of those emotions and feelings behind certain events I was involved with and applied to a completely fictional narrative, which still made that fiction seem very personal. So, so it actually ended up being a very natural progression and natural transition, and that I had all those books that I read on the thriller side of the house. I had all the academic study of warfare. Then I had the experience on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan, and all of those things came together as I got out and started down this path as a writer.
Yeah, but hats off to your mom, the librarian.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, I think that she certainly was instrumental in your
love of reading from a very early age, and I thank her every day. Even if I don't tell her on the phone, I still think about it every day, just how lucky I am to have had parents that just didn't like push reading, but just made it a very natural thing to love, if that makes sense.
What do you think, Barbara? Maybe one or two more questions, and
Sure, if you've got a couple more, and then we probably, yep, we're running quite late.
that's okay. Well, I shouldn't say that's okay, but I think everybody's having a great time. So,
Right.
Nick says, "Thank you for these amazing books. I love the references to gear, guns, whiskey, etc." Let's see here. It just moved. Okay. Will any of your favorite new gear be introduced in this book?
Yes, so there's actually a gear guide that drops today on officialjackcarr.com. You can go there and check that out. Might give you a couple hints as to what happens in the books and what gets used in the novels. And speaking of whiskey and beer and wine and stuff like that, so I happen to be in Austin right now. So I have Pearl beer, of which Texas is known, and a little pop culture trivia. This is the beer that Chuck Norris is drinking when he's buried alive in Lone Wolf McQuade. So, of course, he doesn't stay buried alive because he has that Ram Charger with a supercharger on it and pulls himself out of his. But as soon as he's out of there, he has a sip of Pearl beer. So, in Texas, had to have one of these in honor of Chuck.
Love it. All right, Patrick, wind us up.
Yeah, one more, and this is a good one to end on. Arrett, I think is his name, says, "What made you want to complete 20 plus years in the military instead of getting out and working with three-letter agencies instead?"
Very good question. So the second novel was inspired by some time that I had working for the CIA, one of those three-letter agencies, back in 2006 in Baghdad. So that second novel was inspired by that time, and I had such a good experience, meaning I was engaged. There's a lot less oversight than I had in the military. I was the only special operations guy, only military person attached to this unit, and I loved it. It was the greatest experience of my time in uniform up to that point. And so when I got back, they had a program set up to kind of take you, if you'd worked with them before, into the agency with you didn't have to do a couple of the things that you would have to do if they didn't know you. So it just made the process a little smoother. So that's where I got the polygraph that went into this novel here, The Devil's Hand. And when I was getting my poly, I wasn't thinking like, hey, one day I'm gonna write a novel about this. I gotta remember how this, this scene right here. I didn't think of it like that. So when I went to write this novel, I went and did the research, but I remember the feelings behind being in that chair and then having to come back the next day and get hooked up again to these things and act grilled with these questions. And it was just the most uncomfortable room I'd ever been in. So I got to incorporate that into this novel. But point being, I got accepted and was going to have my class up date for the farm, and then I decided to stay in the military at the last minute, actually, which was probably a wise decision because it allowed me to finish off my time and then transition to doing this what I love doing now.
I have to say that the James Reese polygraph scenes are really fabulous in this book.
Thank you.
And also, Jack, when you read it, will make you realize that polygraphs do not necessarily do what you think they are going to do. There may be a different intention for them. So, Marcus, the final questions, and you're spending your time hanging around with guys who've actually served. Did they do some sort of honorary thing like academics where somebody could make you like an honorary colonel of something?
No, I don't think there's anything like that. No, I always say I have the exact opposite of stolen valor. I like to tell military, or I like to tell anybody to listen. It's like, oh my God, when I was young for military age, it's like I was a wuss. I was like, I played drums in a band, I played soccer, and I read, and I was, all this other stuff. It's like, it's literally the opposite of stolen valor. It's like I'll grab you by the collar and tell you how unready I would have been for the military at that point. I did actually try to get into the Air Force when I got out of college. And it was during the Clinton drawdown years. It was like 94 or something like that, and 93. And it was tough. And I was basically, they said, no, thanks. And that was the Air Force. I probably could have tried Army or something like that. But the whole sort of experience kind of made me feel bad because I was like, I'm a multilingual, I'm a college graduate, I get good grades, and I didn't get in. So I just.
You were overqualified, Mark. You were overqualified.
I don't know.
One of the magic things about fiction is that here we have two authors, hugely successful, both writing military action adventure, wonderful stuff to read, both going to have film treatments and so forth. And they come from very different places, but the books are the books. And who you are and what you did is not the way we judge the books. The books have to stand for themselves. and live on their own. So
For sure.
I feel enormously, I can't tell you what a real pleasure it has been over the years to work with both of you. Mark, since The Gray Man, our $7.99 paperback, you know, who knew?
That's so awesome. That is so awesome. I love that. And another funny thing is, so when Mark and I hang out together and people come up, they always think Mark's the SEAL. And he's such good shape right now. And I am like, yeah, the opposite of that. I'm like just typing away here.
Your calf, just look at Mark.
I gotta get working out again. Oh my gosh! If we had by next year, by the next time we hang out again in Poison Pen, we're gonna have to I'll have to be back in shape by that point. So I have about a year to do it. A little less than a year.
You're doing fine.
If things open up and I can get back downstairs.
Gentlemen, as always, it's been an absolute treat. The time passes so fast when we're together. I'm just always blown away by that. So I will look forward to seeing Jack and Stephen Hunter on, I think it's Friday, May 7th. I think it's May 7th. I might have the name. It's Friday, the second Friday in May. And Mark, obviously with all this going on, I'm going to have a chance to see you several times coming up, including another round with your friend, the Colonel, the Marine, because I mean, he's so cool. That was really
he is.
He's a great guy. So thank you both very, very much. Thank you all for watching us this evening. There will be a podcast of this available tomorrow, and it will live forever on YouTube and on Facebook. So you can encourage your friends to watch it. And let me grab my glass and give Jack a final salute, because tomorrow is publication day. So
congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And Mark, thank you for making the time to do this. I mean, you have thousands of things going on. It means so much to me. Sincerely appreciate it. And Barbara, of course, thanks for launching all my novels and for all your support. It means a ton. And to everybody else out there, thank you for taking a risk on me as a new author and then, telling a friend. So sincerely appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate it. And I thank all of you for supporting the Poison Pen. So good night, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Night.